Okay, well, we're not sure whether the member of the public is in the building or not, so I think we might as well try and make a start. The first couple of items will take a few minutes anyway. So welcome to this meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee. If you haven't been here before, I will, not too far away, I will explain the procedure for the way we deal with items on the agenda for decision. The first item then is apologies, and we have apologies from Councillor Pip Ridout and Councillor Edward Kirk, and Councillor Mike Sankey, there he is, has come to substitute for Councillor Ridout. Welcome to him. Is there anything else on that item, Kieran? Oh, sorry, on my left is Kieran, who is a Senior Democratic Services Officer. He's here to take the minutes and also to advise on any points of order. And on my right is Ali Roberts, I think I got that the right way around, who is from the Rights of Way section and is here for the first item. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting, which were on the 26th of October. They are circulated. Does anyone have any corrections or additions to those minutes? In that case, I think I saw Councillor Ernie Clark moving that we approve them and Councillor Stuart Palmen seconding. All in favour, please wave. That's unanimous, so we can move on. The declarations of interest, this is only for members of Wiltshire Council. No one else in the room who may think they have an interest needs to declare any interest in anything. Do we have any members of the council? And I see Councillor Ernie Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I did send an email to Stuart earlier on, so I don't know whether it's turned up. Anyway, re-agenda item 6. May I clarify that whilst I have a predisposition relating to this item, I do not have any predetermination. I will consider the matter with an open mind. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Ernie. Well, we'll minute that because I think it is sometimes helpful for these things to be minuted. You may have a disposition, but you do not have a predetermination because you have an open mind. Kieran's got that. Does anyone else have any interest to declare of any kind? Right, okay, we can move on. Chairman's announcements, these are just the standard announcements. I think the first one that is said at almost every meeting here, and I suppose there's some point in it, is that we don't know of any planned fire alarm drill. So if you hear a loud ringing, just stay where you are, and Kieran, who is on my left, will immediately jump to the rescue to tell you how to get out of the building. Could I ask everybody, and that includes me, to turn off or turn to silent any mobile telephones or mobile devices, anything that might ring and interrupt someone who's speaking, which can be very disconcerting. And then the other thing I will do is to explain how we deal with things. We have only 2 items on today's agenda. First of all, we hear from an officer, usually the officer who has been working on the report, but not always. And then we have questions from members of the council to the officer, just to clarify anything that isn't clear. And then we go to members of the public who have signed in. This is not a free-for-all for anyone in the room. It's supposed to be very orderly. You need to sign in advance, and we go to you. You get 3 minutes each to speak, unless you're representing a statutory consultee, such as a parish council, in which case you get 4 minutes or up to 4 minutes, and we take you in a particular order, which I have not got in my head. I think it may be objectors first, then supporters, and finally the parish or town council and any other statutory objectors. So please could you stand by when we, and I will, before we start the public forum, I will indicate the order of speaking so that you're not completely taken by surprise. We try to be reasonably strict on the time limits because occasionally people do go on at great length and it can throw us off. And in any event, if somebody goes on, if someone is allowed to go on well over their time and someone else sticks strictly to the time limit, it's kind of unfair that people are effectively getting an edge, an advantage in the public forum. So that's why we do try to be quite strict. If someone goes over by half a minute, I will just give an extra half a minute to anyone else on the other side. Right, we come then to public participation, and this is for two things. First of all, if anyone has put down a notice of question, Kieran, do we have any questions? No. And then secondly, if anyone has come along today to speak and you are in a great hurry to get away, you can, if you wish, speak now, but most people prefer to speak immediately before the item that they are interested in. So does anyone wish to go now who has signed in to speak? I'm not seeing anyone indicating. In that case, we go on to, turning over the page, footpath, Hilperton 54, and we have a report which is in the agenda. And as I say, Ali Roberts, who's on my right, is now going to talk us through the recommendation.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Should have practiced this, sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Ali Roberts, and I'm a definitive map officer for the Rights of Way and Countryside team. The order for discussion today is the diversion of footpath Hilperton 54, circled on the plan in red. The path is located close to the parish boundary of Hilperton and Trowbridge and links Bridleway Hilperton 30, known as Middle Lane, to footpath Trowbridge 54 and runs parallel to Elizabeth Way. The order is made under Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, which requires the order-making authority to be satisfied that the diversion of the footpath is necessary to enable development to be carried out in accordance with planning permission granted under Part 3 of the 1990 Act. It is important that only the legal test is considered. The footpath diversion application is not an opportunity to object to planning permission. The planning permission for the development of 187 residential homes and infrastructure on the land over which footpath Hilperton 54 is situated was considered by elected members at the Strategic Planning Committee on the 3rd of November 2021, with members approving the delegation of authority to the head of development to grant planning permission. Wiltshire Council granted planning permission on the 30th of June 2022. As can be seen from the diversion order plan, the proposed development lies directly over the legal line of Hilperton 54, which is shown with a bold continuous line. Therefore, the development cannot continue without the successful diversion of the footpath. The legal test for diversion, as set out under Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act, has been met by this order. The order plan shows the diversion route with a bold dashed line to the northeast of the development site and retains its connection between Middle Lane and Trowbridge 54. The order received 4 objections, which can be seen in full at Appendix 3 of this report, with officer responses in full at Appendix 4. The committee should consider the legal test for diversion against the objections received in order to decide whether Wiltshire Council continues to support the making of the order. Objections state that the proposed route is longer and less convenient. As can be seen on the plan, the current path is a direct route which goes straight through the people's future homes, and any diversion required for development to be carried out would have to be longer. The diverted route has a minimal increase of approximately 54 metres, which is not considered to be substantially less convenient to the public. However, the convenience test is a legal test for Highways Act 1980, Section 119 diversion applications. It is not a legal test for a 257 application. The only legal test for a 257 application is that it is necessary for development to be carried out. The objection also stated that the planned development road could be moved northeast following the route of Hilperton 54. Therefore, the right-of-way would not require a diversion. However, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Rights-of-Way Circular 109 advises that any alternative alignment should avoid the use of estate roads wherever possible, and preference should be given to the use of made-up estate paths through landscaped or open space areas away from vehicular traffic. The site plan shows the diversion route in yellow through the landscaped open space area and is therefore in line with DEFRA's guidance. The planned estate road will be adopted and will be available to the public as well as the diverted footpath. Environmental concerns were also raised in the objections to this order, particularly regarding the hedge that lines the route of Hilperton 54. However, environmental concerns are considered when determining the planning application, which is now granted, but is not relevant to the legal test for a Section 257 Town and Country Planning Act. The granted development will be urbanising what has previously been an open field, so there is already an effect on the character of Hilperton 54. The diversion of the right-of-way in isolation has no additional environmental impact. The current route of Hilperton 54 is narrow and unsurfaced. The diversion route will have a recorded width of 2 metres, open and available to the public, with all-weather hog-in surface, therefore improving the access for all, including less able-bodied, families with prams, etc., for members of the public and for residents of the 187 homes of the granted development. Where an order is refused, Wiltshire Council must demonstrate that the development for which a planning application has been granted can be carried out without the need to divert the footpath. In this particular case, the planning application granted on the 30th of June 2022, with the granted development lying directly over the legal line of Hilperton 54. Therefore, the development cannot continue without successful diversion of the footpath. The legal test for diversion, as set out under Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, has been met. The proposal is that Wiltshire Council's Parish of Hilperton 54 diversion order and definitive map and statement modification order 2022 be forwarded to the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs with a recommendation that be confirmed as made. The committee today are as follows. If the committee supports the order be forwarded to the Secretary of State for determination as follows: the order be confirmed without modification, or the order be confirmed with modification. Or if the committee does not support the order is abandoned, with clear reasons given as to why Wiltshire Council no longer supports the making of the order, i.e. why the order fails to meet the legal tests. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the council? And I'm happy if we have any present who are not on the committee to bring them in. I don't see any hands. Could I then ask a question, Ali? I was looking at the objections and the answers to them, and one of the objectors was raising the issue of the hedgerow, which he was saying that if the development were redesigned so that it was redesigned to leave the footpath in place, then perhaps the hedgerow, which presumably is an enclosure hedgerow, could be kept. What is the answer to that?
The hedgerow directly lines the route of Hilperton 54, and it also goes straight through the development site. So it would also block the development site.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's your answer. Okay. Are there any other questions to the officer about the report? In that case, we go to members of the public. Do we have anyone signed in? Well, we do. We have a supporter who is Alex Winter from Barratt Homes. Are you there, Mr. Winter? Over to you. Up to 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members and members of the public. My name is Alex Winter and I am the Design and Planning Coordinator speaking on behalf of the applicant, Barratt Homes in Bristol. The application under consideration is the diversion of public path Hilperton 54 under Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act. And we are required to make this application as a result of the planning consent 20/09701/FUL received in June of this year. The reason for the reason of the diversion of the public right-of-way is to enable the development to be carried out in accordance with the consent. The diverted route begins and ends in the existing locations and is taken through public open space along the Elizabeth Way boundary. The footpath will be minimum 2 metres wide and constructed with porous, compacted gravel surface, and this will be an improvement in terms of access for all across the site from the narrow and unsurfaced footpath that is existing. The proposed diversion will be separated from the highway of Elizabeth Way by a landscape buffer. This buffer is proposed to be 13 metres wide at its narrowest and 24 metres wide at its widest. The buffer will be planted with a mixture of meadow, grassland, circa 65 new trees and circa 3,000 new shrubs. Barratt Homes is confident that this application meets the legal test as required by Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act, as the existing route will be obstructed by the residential dwellings consented under application 20/09701/FUL. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much, Mr. Winter. And you are the only member of the public speaking on this item. So then that then takes us, at this point, I would bring in the local member, if not a member of the committee. But the local member is a member of the committee, so I will start the debate and go to Councillor Ernie Clark.
Thanks, Chairman. Not much to say, really. I was pleased to see there was other people that objected to this other than myself. It's a pity that the representative from Barratt, they couldn't have actually put a bit more thought into it when they designed the site and put in for planning application. But as we all know, the developers are quite happy to rip up hedges and do what they like. I can't see that I've got hope in hell of getting this anything other than having it referred with the support of the Wiltshire Council. So I've got nothing more to say, Chairman.
Thank you, Ernie. I didn't draw out the options, but I believe, Ali, that we are required, because there are outstanding objections, we are required to forward this to the Planning Inspectorate to determine, and it's up to us whether we support it or take some other view on it at that stage. Is that right?
That's right. If Wiltshire Council would like to support the order, and we would need to send it through to the Planning Inspectorate for an independent determination. But you do have the option of abandoning it if you don't think it meets the legal test.
I hadn't gathered that, so we could abandon it. Okay, well, in that case, I'm looking to somebody to move a motion which would either be that we abandon the order or that we forward it to the Planning Inspectorate and presumably that we support it. And I look to Councillor Palmen is indicating.
I move that we support this and pass it on to the Inspectorate.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Bill Parks. So it's been moved and seconded that we give this our support and that we forward it for confirmation to the Secretary of State. Does anyone else wish to speak before I go to the vote? Okay then, all in favour of that motion, please indicate. Any against? Any abstentions? That is forwarded. We've decided that. Okay, so we now move on. Thank you very much, Ali. We can release you to something else. Other duties. Merry Christmas. The next item, I think, is Kenny Green, who's going to talk us through the planning appeals and updates, which is a short sheet on around about page 63. Over to you, Kenny.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So on page 63 of the agenda, we've got 4 determined appeals, all of which were dismissed. The one application or the one appeal I would like to probably concentrate on most was one that came before this committee back in September last year for an application for a replacement dwelling at 37A Monkton Farley, where officers reported it for approval. Committee considered it and decided that it wasn't acceptable in Greenbelt terms, refused it in terms of Greenbelt policy, as well as neighbouring impacts. And as the report, the table sets out, the inspector agreed with his committee. So well done, committee members. Now, there was an associated second appeal. So there was a costs appeal that the appellant lodged, as well as appealing against the refusal. So it was done at the same time. So as well as appealing against the refusal for planning permission, they also applied for full costs, because they didn't accept the Greenbelt test assessment and they didn't accept the neighbouring impact reason for refusal. So it's not all green light territory, because the inspector didn't agree there was enough harm in terms of neighbouring impacts to justify the refusal. But having said that, we didn't go down for partial costs and we certainly didn't go down for full costs. So the inspector accepted the application or appeal wasn't acceptable in policy terms and Greenbelt harm terms, so it was dismissed. And the costs application also fell away because the inspector said, although he didn't agree with our judgment on neighbouring impacts, we weren't at fault in terms of unreasonable behaviour. So there's a test there. So as long as we justify our position and our explanation as to why we thought it was unacceptable, that was enough. So the inspector accepted our position and that application was dismissed. 3 other appeals, one at 3 Marketplace, Warminster, which was a retrospective application for the installation of UPVC double glazed windows in a listed building. That came to officers, we refused it. It went to appeal and the inspector agreed with all our arguments in terms of heritage harm, and that is with our enforcement officers to take the appropriate action. The other 2 appeals, one at 34 Woodrow Road and Paddock Hill, or the Paddock at Hill Road, Sutton Venie. Those 2 appeals were for singular dwelling houses. And interestingly, those appeals did factor in the fact that we didn't have an up-to-date 5-year housing land supply. So members have heard me talk about we still have got the right to give weight to our adopted plan, even though we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. And it's up to the decision maker to apply the appropriate weight in terms of that application or appeal. And those 2 appeals, the appellants tried to argue or tried to convince the inspectors that because we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, we should be allowing those one-off houses. Well, we argued against that and the inspector agreed with our position, fundamentally because all development has to be sustainable at the end of the day, and if it's not sustainable or it's not justified, and if there is harm as well, which in the case of the Paddock, which I think is in the AONB, that was additional harm for that particular appeal. And as I said, Chair, all 4 appeals were successfully defended. And I would just reiterate, well done to the committee for refusing Monkton Farley.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a triumph for Johnny Kidney, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. Ernie Clark.
I'll just be flippant and say, could we have that minuted? Because we don't very often get that sort of praise from the officer.
Oh, no, I think that's unfair, actually, Ernie. I think Kenny Green is one of our more even-handed planning officers who can recognise merit even in elected members when they get something right, which we do sometimes do. And I thought that was very gracious of him to say what he said. Councillor Carbin.
Yeah, I think I can claim the initial call-in on the Monkton Farley one. It went over to Johnny Kidneys after the elections. But thanks for giving us the full decisions as well and the supplement. That's very useful. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trevor. Sorry, I had forgotten that. I do apologise. I think if you would like it minuted, Ernie, I'm sure Kenny Green wouldn't mind that his gracious words should be recorded for posterity. So I'll look to Kieran to do that. Is there any other comment or question on that? So all we have to do, I think, then is to note it. I'll move that we note it. Someone to second. Thank you, Councillor Seed. All in favour of noting it. That's unanimous. Okay, so we can then move on to the next and indeed last item on the agenda. Before we do that, I've just remembered I did forget to mention that there are a few refreshments after we've finished the meeting, which are in the members' room, which is just over the way, and anyone present is invited, including officers and members of the public. So let us then hear from Kenny Green, who is going to talk us through this next item, which is the planning application at Ivy Lodge, Lower Woodrow.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular application was one that was handled by a colleague, Jonathan Maidman, who's not available today. So you've got me to present the case and to answer any particular questions. But I've been to the site. I know the site well. I've been dealing with applications in this area for many years. So I'm well qualified to present this case, I think. So it's an application for a 2-storey extension to a dwelling house known as Ivy Lodge. the property was approved fairly recently after a 2019 application, which itself is tied as an equestrian workers' dwelling. So the usual applies in terms of the plans. So the red line outline is the application site, and the property is already there. And you've got an aerial view which shows a little bit of context in terms of some associated building stables that the applicants have got to the west of the dwelling house and surrounding properties, including other dwelling houses. So this is another plan that shows, you may not be able to see it, but there's a faint blue outline, which hopefully the mouse is showing here. Yep, which shows the applicant's land associated to the business. A more close zoomed in view of the existing site plan, so the dwelling house and their outbuildings, stables to the west. So the elevation plan showing the existing dwelling is calculated at 96 square metres, single storey, as you can see. It's a 2-bed property that was justified as part of the 2019 application for a rural workers' dwelling, which obviously gained consent under that application that's on the slide and built and is occupied. Now, what we've got in front of this application in this committee is an application to extend a two-storey form. So the existing is that existing arrangement there, and the applicants seek to extend and build a 2-storey addition. Technically, it could have been treated when it was validated as a new dwelling, but it wasn't. It was treated as an extension, as that is exactly what the applicant is proposing. So that is what I suggest this committee considers, whether you consider this as an appropriate extension to an existing dwelling, because after all, that is what is being proposed. And as you see from this elevation, you've got all 4 elevations. That is the existing single-storey structure. That is what is being proposed. And just to give you a feel for the sizes, the length of that projection is about 23 metres. So it's roughly doubling up in terms of what already exists, and obviously with a 2-storey form. Block plan just showing you exactly where the 2-storey addition would go, and also there's a single-storey extension also proposed onto the existing single-storey property. A couple of slight drawings showing the floor plans. So upper floor, ground floor to start off with. Oops, go back. The applicant is proposing to create an office space to support their business, which at the moment I think they use their dining room / kitchen sitting area because they don't have a dedicated office space. So this proposal would provide that provision, as well as a hall, drawing room, and an upper floor, a couple of bedrooms, landing, bathroom, and ensuite. This is just a composite slide just to reiterate what exists and what is now being proposed. And following that, got a series of slides just to show you photographs taken over the course of the last couple of weeks at different times of the day and in different weather conditions. So starting off with a view from the main highway, looking at the entry point and the existing dwelling. So that would be generally considered the frontage. And you can just see mainly the gable and part of the roof from this vantage point. Into the site now, you can see the structure with the extension onto the front and a flue, all approved. A view from the rear, looking back and including some of the view from the applicant's associated outbuildings, stables in the background, and you can just see a 2-storey property in the background here, which is a neighbouring property. Looking back closely or close to the existing stables, and this is looking east. And the two-storey extension would go somewhere here. This is a view from the, or close to the Menage, looking back to the dwelling house and the associated outbuildings to the west, and the entry point is somewhere in here. This is another view taken from the public right-of-way, which is to the south of the application site. So the dwelling house is in here, and the two-storey extension would be visible at this vantage point, and it would go into this position here. That's just the associated site plan that shows the position and orientation or alignment of the public right-of-way to the south of the applicant's land control. Now, this particular application has been called in by Councillor Phil Alford on the basis that the building is to provide additional accommodation to support the business. It isn't an application we formally went out to consultation with our agricultural/equestrian advisor, because he charges this council every time we do so. But I had an informal consultation with him without costing the council any money. And we discussed the application, and he shares officer concerns about the size of the proposal. Now, this application doesn't have any parish council objections. There are no third-party objections. There would be no neighbouring impact concerns for this application. It is principally a question of whether the committee considers this an appropriate extension to an existing dwelling, and the key test is CP 57, which is our design-based local plan policy. Now, officers are advising that this particular extension isn't subservient. It doesn't respond positively to the existing character and appearance of the single-storey dwelling house, and by virtue of its two-storey form, it would appear significantly different to what already exists. It wouldn't cause any harm to neighbours, but there would be a consequential harm to the character of the immediate property and its surroundings, because it would change from single-storey form and its associated buildings being single-storey to having a two-storey element, and a very large two-storey element. So the test is whether this committee considers it an appropriate extension, bearing in mind the terms of CP 57 that generally seeks all extensions to be subservient and in keeping with the character of an existing building. So it is recommended for refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Kenny. Over to questions from members. And could I chip in with a question first? Kenny, you raised the issue about whether this was technically a new dwelling, whether it was in fact an extension to an existing building or whether it was a new dwelling. And can you talk us through that? I mean, it does appear to be an extension. It's a very large extension. But, I mean, we accepted and registered the planning application calling it an extension. I mean, is there an issue there on whether it's a new dwelling or not?
Thank you, Chair. We, as officers, we have treated it as an extension, but there would be, because of its size, it could potentially be treated as a new dwelling, because you've got all the accommodation in the existing dwelling that we could treat as an existing dwelling, and then you've got the extension with all its floor plan provision that could potentially be used as a separate dwelling, but that's not what is being proposed. So we are treating it straight down the line as an extension, albeit a very large extension.
I think that wraps up that issue. We do have several hands. I think Councillor Wickham was first. I think Councillor Seed was second. I think Councillor Clark was, but I hope you're happy with that order. Councillor Wickham first. I think if you speak up, you have a very clear voice anyway.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask, Kenny, obviously core policy 57 you've explained and its sense of place and local context, etc. I I'm sure other members would have also received a letter which comments on a financial test that the officer has made mention of. I wonder if you'd be able to explain that. I couldn't open another attachment that came with that, and I just wondered if you'd be able to shed any
Kenny,
light
can
on
you
that,
shed some
please.
light on that?
Thanks, Chair. I certainly can't comment on any submissions you've received, because I've certainly not received any additional submissions. But in terms of the financial test, that was one of the aspects that our agricultural advisor was very interested in, because obviously he assesses agricultural dwellings on behalf of the council in terms of a business case, whether it's viable from a business side. Because this is an existing dwelling and it's because it's a proposed extension, the financial test isn't really a material issue for officers to get too concerned about, because if the applicant considers that this is a viable proposal, then it's their business. It's not something that's material to this particular application. Had it been a new dwelling, it would have opened up the avenue of having to test the business case and the financial side. But because it's an extension, then we're treating it as an extension to an existing dwelling.
Thank you. That's good clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seed.
Remarkable, thank you. I do find the mention of a financial test at all to be challenging, and I also don't think I've come across before the introduction of an expert opinion as a casual opinion thrown in a meeting without giving the applicants chance to look at that opinion and challenge. And so I do. Can we be absolutely clear? Does a financial test apply to this or not? And if so, I think there is a mention of it in the report in one line that could be considered. But if we're absolutely clear that the financial test does not apply, could I ask, is that the case?
Certainly,
I think
Chair.
that's what you just said, isn't it, Kenny? That
Right.
the financial
Okay.
test does
Well,
not apply.
it was not quite as clear as that. It was, well, you know, either yes or no, and if you said no, it shouldn't. The second thing I just am finding the agricultural opinion. Who is that given by? Okay, so you've got an agricultural opinion from Tony Coe. Does he normally give equestrian opinions? Okay, so where's it written down?
Chair, just to clarify, it's not unusual for officers to have informal consultations. So it's not unusual in that particular case. But it's not written down. It was a verbal conversation I had with Tony Coke about, and he was questioning the business side. And I said, that's not, just to reiterate the point, it's not relevant to this application because it's treated as an extension. So the viability angle and his potential concerns about this being an issue, it's not material to this application.
So the opinion on anything with viability is not material to the application?
Not material to this application.
Okay, that's fine. I'd just also like to clear up something which jumps out of the report. The first planning history condition 2. Can you confirm where in bold letters, in bold type, it says that it talks about no further additions or extensions, and then it goes on to say that any additions or extensions need to be the subject of a planning application. Can you just confirm, so that we clear up, that is standard wording to remove permitted development rights and makes it absolutely clear that if an applicant wants to put any further additions in, that they simply put a planning application in, as this applicant has done? Because the way it comes out in the report is that there must be no further development to this on this site, which isn't actually what the second line clarifies.
Yep, certainly, Chair. Just to clarify, that is standard wording. That is our standard condition when we seek to remove PD rights on an approved dwelling house. So it effectively means that if an applicant gains consent for a dwelling house, but it has PD rights removed, they just have to submit an application and pay the requisite fee, and it's assessed, as all applications are, on its merits. So the fact it's in bold, I think it's just to highlight it on the page. I don't think the officer did it for any other reason.
I mean,
and it's standard.
it sort of jumped out in a slightly different way, but no, that's fine. That clarification is extremely helpful. Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you, Councillor Seed. Councillor Ernie Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a little bit of clarification. The report says that the proposal is 110 square metres, two-storey extension. Presumably 110 square metres is the footprint size. So the actual new building would be 220 square metres plus another 11 being attached to a 96 square metre existing building.
No,
Sorry.
the additional square meterage includes the single-storey extension, and it also includes the additional extension on the south elevation. So the existing is 96 square metres, and the additional 100 is what is being proposed in totality. So it would be 96 for the existing and then what's being proposed. But albeit it's a two-storey high addition on the south elevation.
Thank you, Ernie. We have, of course, the applicant and a supporter signed in to speak, so they will be able to speak on that point in due course. Councillor Viger.
Thank you, Chair. Kenny, thanks for the report. Could I just check a couple of things? The concept of subservience that is referred to a couple of times in this report, I don't actually see it in the Wiltshire core strategy. Am I correct in thinking that it's not actually enshrined in any part of our actual Wiltshire strategy?
Correct. The word subservience doesn't appear in CP57, but the criterion 3 of CP57 requires development to respond positively to existing character in terms of build, height, form, width, massing. And officers sort of combine all that to say, well, to secure that, to satisfy that, it has to be subservient.
So that was my second question, in fact, you brought me onto it, which is that bullet point 3 of CP57 talks about responding positively to the existing townscape and landscape in terms of built form, height, mass and scale. And given that a major reason for recommending refusal is the bulk, I guess this is the key bit. So there is no existing townscape because there's hardly anything else around there. So it would be whether it responds positively to the landscape features, i.e. does a building of that size fit into this landscape? Am I correct in interpreting it that way? And also, am I correct in thinking there is no actual empirical criterion within CP57 that gives any kind of hard and fast measure by which one should judge the bulk? It's down to professional judgment.
I mean, there's no policy in the core strategy that's prescriptive that says this is the threshold and anything beyond that is unacceptable. So it is planning judgment on a case-by-case basis. So in terms of the additional bulk, the size, the height, it's all a question of whether you consider it to be acceptable in the terms of CP57.
Finally, if I may, the core policy 48 that talks about additional dwellings may be justified when they're required in the interest of supporting rural employment, and actually calls out in associated with equestrian activities where work accommodation is needed. Does that bring into planning scope the fact that I can see from the planning statement associated with this that this is a growing business with growing demand for the services that are offered, including rehabilitation and for horses and so forth? It makes that growth of the business relevant to planning within core CP48?
It's all tied in. I mean, obviously, the original dwelling house was approved because it was deemed to comply with CP48. There was a justified need for a dwelling house of that size. The applicant is now saying that they are wanting to expand and need additional floor space to support the business and also additional bedrooms for the growing family. So there's two sides to it. Obviously, things evolve.
So, and one on that, sorry, but this is a question, I think, rather than something I should say later on. it is just one more bedroom. There's 2 bedrooms in the existing, so there's only one additional bedroom. And some of the other rooms are going to be, I think, for reception, office, and so on. So it's a business premises as well as a domestic premises, residential. Is that correct?
Just to go back to the plan, because of the busyness of the drawing, that's the principal bedroom as proposed, and then there's a second bedroom being proposed in here. But the ground floor of the existing dwelling would lose one of the ground floor bedrooms. So it's a reorganisation. So it would be 3 bedrooms overall in terms of what would be created as additional accommodation. But it's 2 new bedrooms in the extension, but 3 bedrooms overall. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Viger. I have, are you pointing me to somebody? Councillor Parks.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if I could ask the officer to take us back to the nearby properties. I think there was a map up and they were some distance away. Is that correct? Surrounding properties? Thank you.
So can you tell us where the nearest other dwellings are, Kenny?
So we've got, obviously, the applicant's controlled land here in Oakley Farmhouse to the south of the public right-of-way. That's a property here. And then you've obviously got some buildings here which are associated to Oakley Farm, according to that notation. And then you've got Green Shed Farm to the north east. These are the applicant's outbuildings. Then you've got Pear Tree Stables further to the west. So it's not obviously a highly dense area. It's a very rural part of Melksham. So there's not that many immediate neighbours. In fact, the closest one I think is nearly 100 metres away from the existing dwelling.
Sorry, I asked this question because I'm irritatingly local. And you've mentioned a number of dwellings. Do you know, from having presumably visited the site, whether any of those dwellings, which in themselves actually are all 2-storey, can be seen from the site that we're discussing now?
Kenny.
I actually do know the answer to the question.
No, people don't ask questions unless they know the answer usually. Over to you, Kenny.
I'm afraid it is irritatingly local, but where there might be an effect, if you go back to that map, we are, if you look at all the, any picture you've got here,
Yeah, you can see.
yeah, you can just about see the, and that is taken in winter.
Taken a couple of weeks ago.
If you were to take that, anyway, but I do mention that you know, I do bring in that is some distance away and ask the question, how many can be seen?
I think we better let Kenny answer your question. Kenny.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the photograph answers that question. It's a very rural area, so there's long range or mid range views towards other properties, and that's the closest one that's visible in the background. But it's not close, and as I would just reiterate, there's no neighbouring impacts here, and there's certainly no concerns or policy conflicts in terms of consequential neighbouring harm.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Mike Sankey indicated.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard officers' concerns about the size of the proposed extension. Are there, if this committee were mindful to approve this application, are there any conditions that could be attached to mitigate those concerns?
Thank you, Chair.
What I think essentially, what conditions would you recommend if the committee is minded to approve this?
Yeah, I mean, if the committee was minded to approve, you would have your standard time frame, approved plans, and I would suggest that it would be necessary to reimpose the permitted development rights removal so that the new extension or the existing dwelling doesn't further expand without a subsequent future application coming before the committee. And just reiterating that there is a tie here, that the dwelling house is justified for an equestrian or rural worker's dwelling, and it shouldn't be separated or occupied for any other purpose. But to answer your question, Councillor Sankey, I don't think there'd be any conditions that we could impose that would resolve the concern we've got about the height and size of the extension, because that's what's proposed. So if we, as a council, are minded to approve it, you can't then put a condition on that takes away part of what's being proposed. So if you consider that the extension is unacceptable, my suggestion would be that you vote to refuse it, but otherwise it would have to be approved subject to standard conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kenny. So you're suggesting a standard 3-year condition, a removal of permitted development rights, a reimposition of the same tie, the occupancy tie as before, and that's about it, is it? Yeah, approved plans, yeah. Okay, and I see Councillor Andrew Davis is indicating no.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm for my own peace of mind, the actual equestrian centre is served by the same drive that this property is served by. So what I'm saying is, to go to the equestrian centre that this is linked with, you have to drive past the house. There is not another entrance drive onto the to the site?
Kenny.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of one. I mean, it'd be outside the applicant's
Be
control.
outside the blue line.
If it is, I mean, yeah. I understand that that is the entry point to the site. So both, and that's the entry point I used or have used in the past. That's the property, and that's how you get access off the main highway. And that's where the equestrian outbuildings are. So it's all part of one holding.
Okay, well, in a moment, we're going to go to the two speakers in the open forum, who are the applicant and Mr. Rigg, and they have heard the points raised by members and may or may not wish to give some extra information on those points. If no one else has any other questions, I'm going to go over to the open forum, and the first speaker is the applicant, Mrs. Ailiff. Over to you, Mrs. Ailiff, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jane Ailiff, the applicant. The Planning Office's report presented to you does not provide a clear picture of the application, with salient points from the 2016 application not brought to your attention. Permission 16-08205/full, titled Erection of Replacement Equestrian Stable Block and Temporary Manager's Accommodation on Existing Site. There were 19 conditions, but the report does not detail that there were 5 pre-start conditions and 2 conditions that has had a massive bearing on how this application has developed. The officer has mentioned condition 13, which stated that the temporary dwelling be removed on or before the 18th of November 2019, but more importantly, not declared condition 16, which stated that the dwelling will need to achieve a level of energy performance at level 4 of Code for Sustainable Homes, which cannot be achieved with a temporary build. The cost of the build at the time was between £3,500 and £4,000 per square metre, based on figures obtained from Wiltshire Council. Therefore, required investment would be between £300,000 and £360,000, discounted as it was a self-build, but certainly upwards of £250,000 for a dwelling with temporary permission. We now know that this was an unreasonable condition. The date given in condition 13 of planning permission 16/08205/full was fast approaching, and the government guideline for temporary permission states that it will be rarely justifiable to grant a second temporary permission. We could not allow the property to be demolished, so made the application to secure the dwelling, but the temporary design did not provide a reasonable family home. For this application, we appointed an award-winning architect, and the brief was to design a bespoke house that gives us 3 bedrooms, but to limit the size to other new properties in the locality which have had approval over the last 5 years, and therefore subject to Core Policy 57. PL/2022/07194, this application. There is an item within the officer's report that is misleading and of which you need to be made aware. Although initially the officer states that the extension is 110 square metres, in 9.2.6, it is suggested that there is a 60 square metre drawing room, 75 square metres of floor space to create a landing and bathroom, and another 35 square metres to create another bedroom, which would indicate 170 square metres. That is incorrect. The application is for 110 square metres, and when the reason being portrayed is for refusal is necessary for scale and bulk, this needs to be highlighted. There are a number of new dwellings in the area that are of a larger scale than this proposal, 3 in the same postcode, 2 of which are next door, together with another 3 within the next postcode, and it would appear that CP57 in this case is not being applied consistently. We would therefore ask that you grant our application to provide a reasonable family home which will not have an adverse impact on the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Ailiff. And the second speaker is Mr Rigg.
Good afternoon, councillors. Sorry, just for the record, the drawing that was put up initially is out of date. The outline showing all the houses surrounding, and it will come to light when I read my statement. So, for clarity, the application is not for 170 square metres, but 110. And although the application form states 2-storey, the elevations are quite clear that the proposal is in fact 1.5 storeys with a relatively low ridgeline of 7.9. To assess the size and bulk, you need to review the locality in terms of landscape, but the photographs in the report do not show the realities of the area. Photograph shown in 9 to 11 shows the view from the footpath, but turning 180 degrees, one would have photographed Oakley Farm, which is a 210 square metre new property with an 8.4 ridgeline built in 2015, not 25 metres from the footpath. Just to the right of Oakley Farm, there is a 165 metre squared holiday let built in 2018, which is 1.5 storeys, together with 5 ex-chicken sheds, all of which have been converted to houses or offices, and over 300 square metres and 1.5 storeys high. And although these chicken sheds conversions were allowed under Section Q, they still shape the local landscape for CP57. There is no mention of these developments in the report. Go along the footpath to the northeast and across a stile into the next field, and you are presented with a 220 square metre, 2-storey new property with an 8.3 ridge height at Hack Farm, approved in 1819. The photograph in the rear of our property, shown in 2927, again, if the officer had turned 180 degrees, this would have been clearly seen. I could go on. Another 400 metres along the road, bordering on the Spy Park and Bowden Hill special landscaping area, and you have a 250 square metre, 3-storey house built in 2019 with a 10-metre ridgeline, which has been granted a further 70-metre extension in July this year, together with an extension into the roof of the existing building. This clearly sets the parameters of bulk and size within the locality, and this application is smaller than all these approvals. We would suggest that a financial test is being used for the application, a test that has been deemed unreasonable by the High Court in 2013, and the NPPF's test simply requires a judgment on the need and not on any financial tests or statements. To quote from correspondence received by our agent, this gives clear evidence that this test is being used. An email, 25th of the 8th, where it asks, no real evidence has been submitted with regards need. Email the 10th of October, whilst there is some justification in your submission, and this refers to the details of these other approvals in the area, including size and bulk, which details we shared with the officer, what has changed since the approval? And then on the 28th of October, the dwelling business may subsequently be sold, and the dwelling should not be extended to a point where it becomes unaffordable. To those earning a wage in such an enterprise, I have concerns that the extension would make the premises unaffordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And that is the end of the open forum. And the next item on our agenda is to hear from the local member, if present. And the local member is now present, and he will see where we've got to, and it's over to Councillor Phil Alford to tell us his thoughts on this.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you to the committee as well for hearing this one. I've now called it in for a December meeting, so I do appreciate you giving this your time. So I've just come straight in from work, but I mean, I want to speak really as the local member. I mean, you've heard from Mr. Rigg, and I presume you've heard the officer's report already. Now, this one, in terms of policy, it's, you know, we're a policy-led planning authority, and this one completely sits within that. And where we are really is a complete judgment call. It's down to whether you think the building is too big, in which case you agree with the officers, or you think it's satisfactory for the needs of the owner. Now, I'm personally, as the local member, quite happy with this particular application. Now, I didn't hear the full piece there, but I have no doubt you understand the needs of the applicant and the business itself. We have a successful agricultural business, it's growing, and clearly the building that they're looking to develop is slightly bigger than the one they've currently got, but that building is supported by a growing business. And they have family, they have needs, they've got a child, a daughter that they'd like to be able to bring in with their carer, and therefore they do need some space, and they need a building that can accommodate that and allow them to stay over. So it's very much about ensuring that they've got a home which is suitable for their needs, but also suitable for that of the business. They've got a boot room in the bottom, which is completely necessary. And as such, I really would hope that the members of the committee look favourably upon this. Now, in terms of the size, because I know the size and scale was the issue identified by the officers, it really is completely in keeping with what's in the local area. I mean, you can see, yeah, it's bigger than what's currently there, but what's currently there is very modest. When you drive by, you could easily look over and think it was an office. And in fact, for some time, I did think it was an office. I was quite surprised when I realised that they were living in that space. So when we compare it to the nearest buildings, and I think you've probably heard already, we've got a farmhouse not far from there, 100 yards or so. And the building itself for this farmhouse, Oakley Farmhouse, is quite new. It's not an old building. It's not a traditional old farmhouse. It's very generously proportioned. And it's still bigger, so it's completely in keeping with that. Likewise, not far from here, we've got a number of converted barns. Again, each one are very substantial properties. So it's completely in keeping. It's in keeping with the needs of the applicants, and it's completely sustainable by a growing business. And what I find deeply concerning, and I'm sure this is not an issue, is that if we get to a position in which the owners need to leave their home, even though they still have this business to support because the home no longer meets their needs. And I think that would be desperately unfortunate. That's not a position we want to be in, especially as we do have this successful growing agricultural business. So look, I'm going to leave it there, but thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me to speak. And like I say, I hope the committee can agree with me on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. No, we're grateful that you've shown such an interest and got along to our meeting. Okay, well, that takes us into the debate on this, and I'm going to go to, I see Councillor Sankey is indicating, and he is the nearest thing we have to a local member on the committee today. So it's over to Councillor Sankey, and I hope you will be able to move something, Councillor Sankey.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly, I'd wish to move that this committee grant permission for this application. I did have quite a big piece to go through, but I'm going to keep it fairly brief. What I would say is that Melksham does have a made neighbourhood plan, and as part of the review that's ongoing for that neighbourhood plan at the moment, AECOM have produced a local housing needs survey. One of the things that survey highlights is that there should be focus on 3-bedroomed or 2-bedroomed houses within the neighbourhood area, and therefore I'd like to move that we accept this application. I seek a second.
Before I ask for a seconder, could we just clarify, are you moving this with the scheme of conditions that Kenny Green outlined about 20 minutes ago?
Yes, Chair.
You are? Okay. In that case, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Bill Parks is waving a hand to second, so we have a motion on the table for permission with those conditions as outlined. Have you managed to pick those up, Kieran, you got those from what Kenny was saying? Would anyone else like to, I see Councillor Seed, I see Councillor Andrew Davis. I'll take them in that order. Councillor Seed.
Yeah, I am a councillor who represents an area not very far from this application site, and much of my division is made up of an area like this, and large houses that support businesses, be they agricultural or equestrian, are not unusual, and this would certainly not be out of keeping. And as we've heard, it is smaller than many of those close by to this application. I just want to look into and probe the fact this large extension application, it is a large extension, and if we were looking at it outside of the context of the locality in which it's in, then I would probably have more concerns, but it fits in with, as I've just said, others elsewhere. But I think that we are talking about a large extension purely because the original house was too small for the family needs, but at that stage was subject to a financial test, which could not be proven one way or another because the business hadn't got going. But in addition, the original application was so heavily conditioned that it produced a house which was not suitable for family needs. And that is what the applicants are trying to address now. The principle of permanent development has been given by the council, so there is a permanent dwelling there, full stop, end of story, no question. Perhaps had the applicant had unlimited funding and come up against the difficulties that the officers have presented, then they may well have decided to demolish the small house that they've currently got, use the principle of development and build a much bigger one. But they're going to try and merge the two together. And I do think that they have tried to put design in as best they can, and I think it probably works. I think it's clear that the report is written by someone who doesn't know the area intrinsically. As I say, I know the area well. I've seen the site from all angles and I've visited the site. And I think it is a bit of a nonsense to suggest that this extension does harm to the surrounding area and would leave a dwelling, as I say, that's smaller than similar. And I think there are, what it comes down to and what the officer's objection is based on is purely opinion. And I think we then, as members, have the option to decide whether that opinion is correct. And that opinion is based on, does this building, a building of this size, fit into the landscape? Well, we've heard from the local member to say it does, and I think it's probably very telling that we have an application at this committee which unusually has no objectors, the support of the local member, and no objection from a very active parish council. And I think those are things that we should take into consideration because, in my view, and I think many of us may have the same opinion, locals know best, and the locals don't seem to feel that this is an issue.
Thank you, Councillor Seed. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Just like I said, I've got no problem at all with this application for the usage of what it is and for the purpose of it, but would we not be doing ourselves an injustice if in somewhere, and forgive me for thinking this, that if somebody was to try and subdivide the new property into two properties, is there a condition or something that could be put on that we wouldn't wish, because it wouldn't be very difficult, I'm sure, to, if we were to allow this planning application for at a later date, somebody to suggest, oh, let's just subdivide it into two properties. Is there a condition that could be put in? Well,
Kenny, that would need another application, wouldn't it? Yeah, but sure. I think Councillor Davis's question is, should we be putting a condition on to say sole occupation by one family or something like that? Does it achieve anything?
We would have that already with the occupancy tie, but you wouldn't need to. I mean, the necessity of a condition has to be met every time. So you can't impose a condition that effectively states they need to apply in the future if they want to subdivide it. that's the problem. As the law stands and as the policy regime stands, if this particular property is extended and built, and in the future occupiers want to convert it, they would need to apply for planning permission.
Right. I think that answers your question. Thank you, Councillor Davis. Okay, well, I think I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, Councillor Ernie Clark.
Thanks, Chairman. As this is deemed an extension, even though it's a rather huge one, presumably the agricultural tie will still apply?
It's one of the conditions that Kenny spelled out that he would expect us to impose, and Councillor Sankey has adopted all of the suggested conditions. Councillor Viger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The only other point I was going to make, just following up my question earlier, was that when that core policy 48 does talk specifically about dwellings being justified whether required in the interest of supporting rural employment, that then takes me to look at the business statement, which appears on the portal and says more than we have in the report, when it says that the business continues to be successful, has established a strong basis for longevity. Since it first opened, it's clear there's a huge demand for the intensive rehabilitation services that it provides. So clearly this is a growing business, and I think that brings that core policy 48 into play. And for me, that I understand and respect the concerns about the bulk, but for me they are outweighed by the provision of core 48 and core policy 48 and the justification for the business, based on the growth of the business.
Okay, well, if there are no other speakers, it's been moved and seconded for permission with all of the conditions suggested to us by Kenny Green. All in favour, please show. I think I will join just so that it's not quite unanimous. All against, please show. And there can't be any abstentions because we have all now voted. Well, thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to the local member for coming along, and to the applicant and architect for sparing us their time. And that concludes today's meeting. I remind you that there are now a few mince pies and bits of Christmas cake in the members' room for anyone who would like to come and join, and for anyone who would like to slip